wish Mitt could be more of a team player. You know, I'm surprised he did it this quickly. I was expecting something, but I was surprised he did it this quickly. If he fought really hard against President Obama, like he does against me, he would have won the election. Does that make sense to you? If he fought the way he fights me, I'm telling you, he would have won the election. But I think he's going to end up being a team player. I think he agrees with many of the things that we've done and many of the things that we have in mind, and we'll see what happens.
That was U.S. President Donald Trump earlier today, reacting to Mitt Romney's scathing review of his presidency. Writing in the Washington Post, the senator-elect and former presidential candidate says, with the nation so divided, resentful, and angry, presidential leadership in qualities of character is indispensable. It is in this province, Romney writes, where the incumbent's shortfall has been most glaring. Trump also has to contend with a partial government shutdown now in its 12th day. The president says it will last as long as it takes until Congress agrees to spend more than $5 billion on a border wall. Here to dig into all of this is Aaron Blake, senior political reporter at The Washington Post. He joins us from Washington. Hey, Aaron, Happy New Year. Thanks for coming on the show again. Nice to see you.
Happy New Year.
So the president was actually kind of restrained in that response to Senator-elect Romney's scathing opinion piece, at least more restrained, it seemed, than the tweet that came out earlier today. What do you read into that?
Yeah, I think maybe he was a little bit restrained, although I think that President Trump views being a loser as maybe the worst put down that you could level against anybody. And certainly that seemed to be both the subtext of his tweet earlier today and this press conference that he had with his cabinet meeting. I also think it's worth noting that while the Romney op-ed was somewhat harsh, it actually didn't take issue with the president's policies necessarily. It was more of a character thing. So the president might have even looked at that and thought, hey, you know, he's at least, you know, on board with what I'm pushing forward with legislatively. Maybe I don't want to totally alienate him given how slim the majority is in the Senate moving forward. And you know, I think that if you look at that op-ed closely, you will see that there is some room for the two of them to work together, maybe to eventually come together on certain things. But I think Mitt Romney just wants to serve notice, if nothing else, that he will be something of a hard get for the president going forward.
Yeah, I was wondering what you thought about Romney's motivations, because it was also interesting. He was on Jake Tapper's show on CNN this afternoon, and he too was kind of muted in the way in which he was talking about the president. He said he wasn't going to run in 2020. He said he hadn't decided who he was going to support. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I guess I never really looked at the op-ed as a total broadside against the president. I think it was more of an attempt to bridge the gap between some of Mitt Romney's past commentary about the president back in 2016 when he was arguably the president's most high-profile Republican critic, and the 2018 campaign in which Mitt Romney was trying to win a Senate seat in Utah and was much more muted about the president. I think he needed to say something. He knew these questions were going to be out there once he actually joined the Senate, so he wanted to address it on his terms. He wrote his own op-ed in his own words. And basically said the things that he was going to hold the president accountable on moving forward. From here, it's up to Mitt Romney how closely he wants to enforce the things that he said in that op-ed. I wouldn't be surprised if he isn't that harsh. I also wouldn't be that surprised if he is very harsh on the president. Maybe if he has designs on potentially running for president one day, if the Trump experiment kind of implodes and the Republican Party is looking for something of a unifying figure. A lot of balls are in play right now, but I think this is Mitt Romney setting the tone for what's going to come moving forward here. Is there still speculation in Washington, or any speculation that he does have his sights at some point still set on the presidency? Yeah, look, I mean, this is a guy who ran in 2008 and lost the primary. He was the nominee in 2012, and then he was looking at running in 2016 until the party elders basically said that this was Jeb Bush's turn to run. They didn't want to run the guy who had lost in the 2012 campaign. And so I think if you're somebody who has looked at or run in the past 3 elections, the odds that you don't look at running in future elections are pretty slim. I don't think Mitt Romney views himself as done with politics. I don't necessarily think he would have run for Senate if he didn't want to make some kind of an impact or maybe position himself for another presidential run. These are the kind of habits that die really hard. And so, you know, I don't know if this is necessarily what he's planning on doing, but if things come to pass and this is something that makes sense for him on a political level, he's setting himself up to do that, certainly.
During the same instance, when the president was addressing the Romney editorial, he also spoke about James Mattis, who resigned last month, of course, as his defense secretary. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this was a ratcheting up of the relationship. I wouldn't call it a feud yet, but certainly there is tension there between the president and James Mattis. We were led to believe, and James Mattis sent a resignation letter, that he did resign in protest of the Syria pullout decision. We knew that the resignation date had been moved. Originally, it was in February. Then it was at the end of the year. That was apparently because the president was not happy. But he suggested today that he had, in fact, fired James Mattis, just like he had essentially fired Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State. The fact that the president even saw a need to draw that line between Mattis resigning and being fired, I think is a signal that he is unhappy with Mattis. He is unhappy with some of these other departures, including John Kelly, his chief of staff. But I thought it was, James Mattis is a military general and somebody the president has been very respectful towards. This was maybe the first example of the president genuinely being unhappy and expressing that unhappiness with how this whole thing has transpired.
I want to, of course, also ask you about the shutdown before I let you go. The partial U.S. government shutdown. It's day 12. Is there an end in sight? I know congressional leaders met today. They're going to meet Friday again. Is there an end in sight for this?
Yeah, so we'll learn a little bit more today. Right now, the president has been meeting with Charles Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, but this whole thing has really been in something of a holding pattern for the last 12 days, partially because of the holidays, partially because the president doesn't seem to know exactly what he wants out of this whole thing, and partially because we are just waiting for the Democrats to take over the House, which is going to happen on Thursday. Once that happens, they're apparently going to pass a clean continuing resolution. We don't know what's going to happen from there. The Senate has said they will not take that up. But basically, we were just waiting for Republicans to no longer be in charge of the House, for the new political reality in Washington to take over, and then we'll eventually get started in the new year. So exactly where this is going to go, nobody knows at this point. But I think the process really gets started in earnest on Thursday when Democrats take the House.
What kind of political implications have there been so far? Kind of who's taking the fall for this in voters' minds from your perspective?
Right. Well, we've seen some limited polling on this, and it's about what you'd expect. Republicans and the president have taken more of the blame for this. Of course, the president himself said at the start, before the shutdown began, that he would take the blame for the shutdown. He said it repeatedly in that meeting with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. But also, if you look at the course of these shutdowns, the side of the debate that is one in political power, which has been the Republicans, at least until tomorrow, and two, that is asking for something extra out of these negotiations. And in this case, that is Republicans asking for a border wall. They tend to get more of the blame for the shutdown. So exactly how much that's hurting the Republican Party, it's not clear at this point. But at least moving forward and as we progress in this debate, the fact that Republicans are getting more of the blame, if they continue to, is going to hurt their hand, is going to give Democrats more leverage to get what they want out of this whole shutdown debate.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks a lot, Aaron. Appreciate your time. That's Aaron Blake of Washington Post in Washington.